We're starting the Mishnah on DAF Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Rabbi said we got to finish the parak yesterday, so we're going to start from the Mishnah. The Mishnah lists a couple of cases where some of them you're allowed things you're allowed to say in Lashon in any language. Some of them you're required to say specifically in Lashon HaKodesh. The Mishnah is going. The next couple of blot are going to explain a lot of these Mishnahs. We're not going to go so much in depth into the Mishnah, but we'll just get the basics of it. These are said in any lashon. Parsha SOTAH, the Parsha of SOTAH, when you come to the base of Mikdash, and what exactly has to be said to the lady. The Vidu Meiser is that in the Shemitah cycle, the first, second, and the fourth and fifth years you gave Meiser Sheni, which was brought to Yerushalayim, and the third and sixth year you had Meiser Ani. So at the end of every section of every 3 years, you were required on Acharon Shal Pesach after Mincha, you said a Vidu Meiser in the Beis HaMikdash, and you were basically stating that you fulfilled all your obligations of all the Meiser, you had given them to all the people that were required to receive them. So that you were allowed to say in any language. Kriya Shema, you're allowed to say Kriya Shema in any language. V'tfila, you could daven in any language. Or Berchas HaMazon, V'shvuas Eidos. Shvuas Eidos is when if you have a friend that you believe knows certain testimony, you're allowed to bring him to Beis Din and force him to say the Eidos. And if he still denies it, you can force him to make a Shvua that he does not know the Eidos. If he later admits that he swore falsely, then he will be required to bring a Karban. V'shuas hapikadon, if your friend has a pikadon, he has an object of yours, you lent it to him, or he was watching it for you, and then he denies that he ever had it. You require him to make a shvua about that, and if he admits that he swore falsely, he would again be required to bring a karban. These are said in specifically Lashon HaKodesh. Mikra Bikurim, that when you brought Bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash, there was a parsha of a certain psukim of Aryai Avi that you would say in the Beis HaMikdash. Those had to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. The Chalitza, the parsha of Chalitza, when a lady's husband dies without children, the husband there's a chalitza process done there, so whatever the psukim between the man and the wife and the lady were being said had to be said specifically in Lashon HaKodesh. Brachas v'klalos, these are referring to the brachas the Mishnah will explain of brachas and klalos of Har Grizim and Har Faivel, that after Klal Yisrael crossed over into Eretz Yisrael, they had a certain number of klalos and brachas that were said, which the Mishnah is going to explain about. Berchas Kahanim, when we Kahanim Duchen and Berchas Kahanim, they have to say in Lashon HaKodesh. Or Berchas Kohen Gadol, the Kohen Gadol in Kippur, after he would lane, he would say a number of brachas. Those have to be said specifically in Lashon HaKodesh. Parshas HaMelech is referring to Hakel. After every Yovel, the Melech, the king, would read Sefer Devarim, and that had to be said specifically in Lashon HaKodesh. Parshas Egel Arufa, when there was a person found dead near a city, that city would be required to bring an Egel Arufa. We'll learn about that. There was a Kohen Gadol that was specifically anointed for times of war. He would go out with Klal Yisrael and he would have certain announcements to make to which people should continue going out to war, which people should return home, and that whole parasha was said in specific Lashon HaKodesh. Says the Mishnah, Mikra Bikurim Ketzad. Where do we know that Bikurim is required to be said in Lashon HaKodesh? There's a pasuk says, V'anisa v'amarta l'fnei Hashem lekecha. You should raise up your voice and you should say in front of Hashem. It was referring in the Beis HaMikdash. L'Allahu Omer, and we find in another place, which is the pasuk by Har Grizim and Har Faivel, V'anu halavim v'amru. And by Har Grizim says also Lashon V'anu and V'amru, Ma'ala Lon Lashon HaKodesh, just as by Har Grizim and Har Faivel, it was in Lashon HaKodesh. Afkam Lashon HaKodesh. So too, by Bikurim, it's required of you to say in Lashon HaKodesh. And the Gemara later on will explain where do we know that Har Grizim and Har Faivel required Lashon HaKodesh. Here we're just learning from Bikurim from Har Grizim and Har Faivel, but we don't know where the makar for that is. Chalitza. Well, how do you know that means Daf Lashon HaKodesh?
That's all they do.
You could say it in any language. You could.
They didn't know it.
Egyptian. They didn't know.
They knew it.
They didn't know any language.
Yiddish.
That's all Yiddish.
Chalitza Ketzad. Where do we know that Chalitza is required to be in Lashon HaKodesh? The Ansa v'Amra, again it has the same Lashon of Ansa v'Amra. U'la'alanu Omer by Brachas HaKlolos, v'Anu halavim v'Amru. Ma'alam Lashon HaKodesh, Afkan Lashon HaKodesh. Just as by Har Grizim and Har Faivel, it was required them to say in Lashon Kodesh, so too over here by Chalitza also required the lady and the man to say in Lashon Kodesh. Rabbi Yehuda says you do not need to learn from a Gezerah Shava from Va'anu Va'amru. Rather, the psukim itself of by Chalitza are mashma that it's required in Lashon Kodesh, because the pasuk says Va'ansa Va'amra Kacha. The pasuk says Kacha, that's always referring to Ad Shetayim B'Lashon Hazeh, specifically required of exactly how it's said in the parsha. That's how they would be required to do it. So that would learn that just as it's written, so too you have to say it. Brachas v'kolos keitzad. What was the story? How exactly did this happen of the brachas and kolos of Har Grizim v'Har Eval? Kivan Sh'avar Yisrael Yarden, immediately after Klal Yisrael crossed over to the Yarden. Just to point out, most of these psukim that we learn, all the halachas of this from, are really in Devarim. That Moshe Rabbeinu, before he was Nifter, commanded Klal Yisrael exactly what the story was going to be and how they would go, once they crossed over the Yarden, what exactly they would have to do. So it says, Kivan Sh'avar Yisrael Yarden, once they crossed over the Yarden, Uba'u al Har Grizim v'al Har Eval, they came to these two mountains of Grizim and Eval, Sheba Shomron, that was in the area of Shomron, Sheba Tzad Shechem, Sheba Ital Elonei Moirei. It was near Shechem and near Elonei Moirei. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, when they're going to cross over, Haloi Hema, Be'evar Yarden, and the pasuk continues, it finishes off, Ital Elonei Moirei. Well, Alonu Omer, and by Avram Avinu we find, V'yaver Avram Be'eretz ad Mokaim Shechem ad Elonei Moirei. Ma Elonei Moirei ha'amru la'alon Shechem, af Elonei Moirei ha'amru kan Shechem. Just as we find by Avram Avinu, when it says Elonei Moirei, it says also Shechem. So too, when the Klal Yisrael were crossing over the Yarden, it said Elonei Moirei is also the area of Shechem. Shisha Shvatim Ol Rosh Har Grizim. There were 6 Shvatim that went on the mountain of Grizim, and Shisha Shvatim Ol Rosh Har Eval. And there were 6 Shvatim that went on to the mountain of Har Eval. And the Kehanim and Leviim, the elders of Leviim, stood in the middle with the Aron, in the middle of in the valley. The Kehanim would circle immediately, directly next to the Aron. They were first. And the Leviim circled around the Kehanim. And the entire Klal Yisrael was on the 2 sides of the mountains. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, V'chol Yisrael, this is the Kainav, V'shoitrim, that's the real gears in the pasuk, V'shoiftav, Oimdim Mizah Mizah La'aron. And all of the Yisrael and the elders and the officers and the judges stood from either side of the Aron. Haflu Pneim Klape Har Grizim, they faced Har Grizim, Upasku Bracha, and they started off with a bracha. Baruch Ha'ish Asher Lo Ya'aseh Pesel Masecha. Blessed is the person who does not make a graven image of an idol, it's referring to Avodah Zarah, not making Avodah Zarah. Ve'elu oinim amen. And both the people standing on either mountain answered amen. Haflu pneim klape Har Eval. They changed the direction and they faced Har Eval. Paschu b'klala, and they said it with they started with a klala. Ar haish asher yaseh pesel masecha. Cursed is the man who makes a idol. So each klala and bracha followed the same order. They made a bracha to Har Grizim and the klala to Har Eval. And the Elu Oinam Amen, and both of them answered Amen. Brachas v'kolos, until they finished off all the brachas and the kolos. Now, the Mepharshim explain why this was happening. Then a lot of those brachas and kolos were things that happened were quiet, things that people could do quietly. So Klal Yisrael was affirming that we want to make sure that whatever is public, whatever is things done private, are also public information. And we're attesting to the fact that we were going to keep the Torah in Eretz Yisrael right when they came in, and they were makabel that. Then they took stones, and they built a mizbeach, and they plastered the sides to make it smooth. And they wrote down the Torah in 70 languages. And what exactly they wrote down? Was it just the Aseres HaDibros, just the Torah? That's the machlokes about that. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, Be'er Heitiv, it should be clearly explained. And the clearly explained defined anyone who's able to read it in all 70 languages. And then they disassembled the mizbeach, and they took those stones, and they took it and they rebuilt it in Gilgal. Gilgal was the area where the first stop that the Mishkan came, when they came right into Eretz Yisrael. For the first 14 years during the capturing and division of the land of Israel, the Mishkan was in Gilgal. So they rebuilt it again in Gilgal. Says the Gemara, Parsha Sotah Minalan. Where do we know that Parsha Sotah is allowed to be said in any language? The Ksiv va'omer ha'kayin la'isha b'chol lashon shehu omer. You could say the kayin has to say it b'chol lashon shehu omer in any language that he could say it. Now Rashi has a different girsa in the Gemara. He doesn't go with this girsa, and he has a different pasuk. His pasuk is va'omar el ha'isha. You say to the lady, and from the fact that it says to the lady, she has to understand it. So that's his girsa. Now later on in the Gemara, we're going to see that there is the reason why Rashi went with that, because there's a little bit of question, as we'll explain later, and why he specifically had that pasuk and not the pasuk that that our girsa in the Gemara has of va'omar ha'kayin la'isha.
Would that be different to any warning you would give?
I'm sorry?
Would that be different to any warning you would give? We give a warning. Don't you have to give it in the language that the person understands?
True. We're talking about the parsha in the base of Migdash.
Right.
Not necessarily. We're talking about the kina v'stira, meaning when you warn her. That you could do for sure. That's in any language. Yeah, that's that can be any language. This is referring to the actual seder, what happened with in the base of Migdash. Taner Abanan, Mashmiyan Oisa b'Chalashin Shishamas. We warn her and speak to her about in any language she understands. Al mahi nishaisis. Why is she drinking? Uba mahi shaisa. And how is she going to drink? Al ma nitmes. Why did she become tamei? Uba mahi nitmes. And how did she end up becoming tamei, which is a real tuma, which will answer her and will end up, if she drinks the water, she will end up dying. Alma he shaisis. Why is she drinking? The Gemara is explaining all those four things. Alma he shaisis. Why is she drinking? Aliske kina v'stira. Because of the warning and the seclusion that she had with this other man. Obama he shaisis. And how is she drinking? The mekida shalcheres, with an earthenware jug, as we explained earlier in the Gemaras, that since she fed this man with very nice vessels and nice plates, so therefore we specifically make her drink from a very low and not such a fancy vessel. Alma nitmes. Why did she become tamei? Al iske schleik v'yaldus, because of the frivolous activities that she was doing with these other men, speaking to them too much and acting as a child. And how is she becoming tamei? Meaning, what makes her tamei? Was it intentional or not, or by accident? Willingly or unwillingly? And why did we tell her? Because there are certain instances that she will not become really tamei. Why do we have to warn this? In order that people shouldn't come to think that the mayim, the water, is not real. It doesn't really check her out, because since certain times, if she would do it by accident, she didn't realize it was us, or somebody told her it was mutter, it was ba'inus, or somebody forced her into this situation, she would not become us, and the water would not have any effect on her. So therefore, we didn't want anyone to think that the water wasn't working, so we specifically warned her, and it was really a warning to everybody else to understand that only certain times this water is going to work. Vidu Meiser. Minolan. Where do we know that Vidu Meiser is allowed to be said in any language? The Ksiv, as the pasuk says, V'amarto fnei Hashem, you say in front of Hashem, it's referring to the base of Mikdash, V'arti HaKodesh min habayis. I took out all the Kodesh from my house. He fulfilled all his obligations, and he gave them all to the Chaim, to the Levi, and to the Aniyim, and further. V'yolef Amira Misaita. We learn out Amira Misaita b'chol lashon shehu la'omer. So we learn out, since it says Amira by Saita and it says Amira over here, we have a Gzer Shava to learn out Amira. Now this is what I was referring to when we said that Rashi had a different girsa, because it seems from over here that by Meiser, just from the mere fact that it says Amira, we would not necessarily learn out that that's allowed to be said in other language. We need to have a Gzer Shava to learn from SOTAH. I mean, SOTAH has something more than Meiser really has. So if we're going to use the girsa that our Gemara has of Va'omar Hakayin L'Isha, it just says Lashon of Va'omar. So that's why Rashi says El Ha'isha, the drasha over there is really from El Ha'isha to the lady. And that's why we can learn out Va'omar and learn out from SOTAH that Meiser has the same din. Amar Leir of Zid Labaya asks Rabbi Zid a question to Abaya. V'leilef Amira Milavim. We should learn out the Amira, the pasuk Amira, the Gzer Shava, from the case of Har Grizim v'Har Evel that was also required. Ma'alan b'lashon hakodesh, avkan b'lashon hakodesh. Just as in Har Grizim and Har Evel, it was required of them to say it in lashon hakodesh, so too by by Vida Meiser, we should learn out that it's required in Lashon Kodesh. And it says the Gemara, "Don Amira Grei Dasa me Amira Grei Dasa." We learn out when the pasuk says just the words of Amira from a place where the pasuk just says Amira. Ve'in Don Amira Grei Dasa me Ania ve'Amira. And we don't learn out the place where it says Amira as Vida Meiser says just Amira. We don't learn out from a place that says Ania ve'Amira as the pasuk by Hargrizim and Haravel. It said Ve'anu Halavim ve'Amru. Both the double lashon of Anu and Amira. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Adam Omer Shvacha b'kol namuch v'genusay b'kol ram. The person should say his praises in a low voice and his degrading facts about himself in a loud voice. Where do we learn this from? Shvacha b'kol namuch, his praises in a low voice min Vida Meiser. You learn out from Vida Meiser. Vida Meiser was said in a low voice, and Vida Meiser was talking about all of the obligations that you had fulfilled and all of your mitzvahs. So we said in a low voice because we don't want to say all of the good things about yourself publicly. The Genusa b'kol ram. Where do we learn out that you say the bad things about you in a loud voice? Mimikar b'kurim, from the parish of Bikurim, and there we're referring to Arami Ovid Avi. We speak about where Klal Yisrael came from. They came from Lavan. So we speak. Those are not such nice things to speak about. So we don't mind saying that in a loud voice. Asks the Gemara of Gnusay b'kol ram, you should say the bad things in a loud voice. V'amir Rabbi Yochanan mishum Shimon ben Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Shimon ben Yochai, "V'pnei ma tiknu tefillah b'lachash." Why do we say quiet Shemona Esrei? Kedei shelo levayish as over avera. In order not to embarrass the people who are confessing on their sins and doing tshuva on all the averas they did, so they could do it quietly and no one will know. Sharei, where do we know that we try to keep it quiet and we try to protect the people who did Averis and are trying to do tshuva? Where do we know that from? Sharei lo yicholak hakasav makom ben chatas l'oila. The place to shecht the chatas and the place to shecht the oila in the Beis HaMikdash was the same area. It was on the northern side of the Mizbech. And the reason for that was that a person who was bringing chatos would be able to blend in with the masses who were bringing olas, and nobody would know that he was actually bringing a chatos. So therefore, what's the reason that we are allowed to say the bad things of Rami Avi in a loud voice? We see from over here that we don't say. We try to keep everything quiet.
Aren't we dealing with apples and oranges a little bit? Which part of Esrei is individual chatayim, but here when you're talking about Bikurim, you're talking about the whole nation, right? In other words, it happened to the whole nation, so it's not the same Ganai.
I mean, you should be allowed to say it in a loud voice.
I'm saying when it comes to Bikurim, right, it's not individual. It's talking about what Lavan did to us as a nation, right?
That's true. Meaning that we shouldn't mind saying a loud voice was private things we should say in a voice.
Right. When it comes to private stuff,
you say.
So then it's a good eye.
The probably is because we're learning out from here. It's not just we're allowing you to say it loud. We're learning out from here. We're saying a klal. We're saying a v'gnusay b'kol ram. We're learning out. The Gemara is darshaning that Amar Adam Omer gnusay b'kol ram, and the raya for that is from Bikurim. Right? So you can't bring a raya, if you're saying that it's different than any other case, then you can't bring a raya. You say, okay, Bikurim could say in a loud voice. What about every other case? Rabbi Yochanan was bringing a raya from Bikurim that he allowed to say in voice to every other case that you would be saying bad things about yourself, and that would apply to even private things.
Mm-hmm.
So answers the Gemara, don't say the bad things about yourself, but say your tsar, because they were referring to Lavan and Mitzrayim and all the things that happened that befell Klal Yisrael. So we're talking about the tsar, so that you should say in a loud voice. Ketanya, as we learned in the Brisa, the Tamei Yikra. A person who becomes a Mitzrayim is whenever anyone walks near him, he should call out Tamei, he's Tamei. Why does he have the double lashon? One of them is to tell people to not come close to him because he's Tamei and they shouldn't become Tamei. And the other reason is, as the Gemara is going to say, that people should daven for him, that they should know that he's a Mitzrayim. The Gemara says, you should tell everybody about your pain, and people should be able to daven for you because of this. And any person that something happens to him, you should tell a lot of people about it, and people therefore can go and daven for you. So too, now it's the truth is not really so comparable because Lavan and Mitzrayim were past things that happened to Klal Yisrael. So it's not really so comparable of tsar that's someone's happening right now to a to a past tsar that has happened, but it means to say that just as that we are trying to arouse people's awareness that things have happened to Klal Yisrael, and we should daven that things shouldn't like that should never happen again to Klal Yisrael, and any of the tsaras that we have shouldn't happen.
Can't we say the lovins of this world are always after us?
Right. Well, yeah, that's true. But that's really what we're trying to say.
Thing, yeah.
Right. That's right. The specific is love, but it's the love right. Everything, right. That's what we're trying to say. Now the Gemara is going to explain the Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's memra about not embarrassing people that have done averos. Gufa. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Mipnei ma tiknu tefil b'lachash. Why did we establish there should be quiet shemin esrei? Shel levayish es over avera, not to embarrass the people who have done averos. Because we didn't want to. The Torah didn't differentiate the place of shechting the chatas and the oila. What have you accomplished? So you've made the shechita in the same place, but you still have another problem. The dam went into different places. Dam chatas l'mayla, dam oil l'mata. There was a red line, the chuta sikra, that went in between on the mizbech at the halfway mark, and there was certain dam that you would place on the top half of the mizbech, and certain of the blood certain karbanis, their blood went on the bottom half of the mizbech. So chatas went to the top half of the mizbech, and the oila went to the bottom. So again, it was clearly discernible which behema. You see a kain there working with the dam, you know exactly what kind of kain he's working with. Answers the Gemara, Hasam kain hudi yada. That only the kain knows. Now Rashi explains this, which is a little here. Rashi doesn't seem to add anything. Rashi just says, he says he himself knows, and everyone else doesn't know. And there's no embarrassment to this. That's a little problematic because Rashi's just, I don't really see how Rashi's adding anything to what the Gemara really said. And everybody knows, the Gemara says the Kohen knows. So what does it mean that he knows? He's doing Avodah was on the Mizbech. Mizbech was in an open public place. It was a very large Azara. The Azara was very large. The Mizbech was close to 20 feet high. Right? People were clearly able to see what part of the Mizbech he was doing. He wasn't going to some side room where he just did the dam himself and nobody watched. I mean, any person staring there clearly could watch a kain on top of Mizbech, and he knows what carbon he's working with. Every halacha was clearly, some was hard to see, but many carbonas had different halachas. Where the dam went, exactly how the zrika was done, it was very clear what carbon you're working with. So we might be able to answer that when the kain gets up to the mizbeach, he's holding the blood in the kli sharis, right? That kli sharis is not different. Every carbon got the same kli sharis. So nobody would necessarily know. They say, yes, that guy's doing a chatas, but whose is it? There's 15 people on the floor over here having the karban shechted. You don't necessarily know which guy this kain come from, unless you're going to say there's some guy there that was actually being cheshbon when the guy shechts it. He's saying, oh, let me follow that guy's kain. But there's a lot of people working. There's a lot of kahanim running around. I mean, if a guy's that busy, for those kind of people, we don't have to be concerned about that. Yeah. So that's what I think the Gemara means when it says that the kain hudi, because only the kain himself knows which guy he's bringing the dam for.
You have to have that in mind.
He had to have that in mind, and he was working with him. He knows exactly who he's working for. Asks the Gemara, there's another problem. The halacha is that a chatas comes from a female animal, and an oila comes from a male animal. So again, when you're walking based on with your animal, again, people could clearly see what behema you have there. They just look at it, see what it is. Answers the Gemara, Hasam michsa ba'aliyah. A sheep has a very large and fat tail, and that covers exactly which gender the animal was, and you were able to see. Again, you see the same thing that obviously people could, bend down and see, but again, with such kind of people, I guess we don't have to be concerned about. Teinach, so asks the Gemara, Teinach kivsa, Seir Michael Meimar. We know that a chatas has an ability to come from the sheep family or from the goat family, and goats do not possess this fat tail to cover anything. And again, it was clearly recognizable what behemoth you're coming in with. Answers the Gemara, Michael Meimer, as the Gemara Hasam iu de kamichsef nafshe di boile la asuya kivsa. The kamaitis hira. He brought this embarrassment upon himself. He had the option before to bring a sheep or to bring a goat, and he chose to bring a goat. So obviously he's not concerned about his own embarrassment. If he's not concerned about it, we definitely do not have to be concerned about it. Asks the Gemara, but there's one more chatas that was required to only be brought from a goat. Chatas d'avodas kachavim delisagi delav seira. That chatas, if a person sinned with avodas kachavim, with doing avodah zara, there was required of him to bring a goat, so he didn't have that possibility of hiding it with a sheep. And to the Gemara, Hasam nichsaf v'nezel. There we want him to be more embarrassed, ki hechi denechaperle. Since it was such a bad avera of avodas kachavim, so therefore the little bit more embarrassment is good for him he should have kapara. Now Tosfos asks that if we want him to have an embarrassment, so why don't we have him a special place in the Azar to shecht it? Then he really got a lot of embarrassment, get a lot more tshuva. So Tosfos answers that no, he got a little embarrassment, that's enough, and that's all the embarrassment he got. So you can see clearly the Torah, how careful the Torah was, is sensitive to how much embarrassment. It's not just that when you embarrass him, we allow embarrassment, alright, let's pour on him as much embarrassment as possible. It's clearly defined how much, b'midah b'mishkal, exactly to the T of how much he's required to get and how much he's not required to get. This guy will give him a little embarrassment, but not that much. That's that.
So we should be as sensitive when we deal with people.
Right, sure.
I don't know my anatomy of sheep, but if sheep have a fat tail,
right,
and covers the female organ,
right.
So, but if it's a male, you can see what it is. I don't understand. What's the tail got to do to cover it?
Fat lot of good
I don't know. I had the same problem that there must be udders there. I had the same question. I'm not really sure.
Sheep don't have big udders.
They don't? Cows do?
People, when they're looking at a far distance, they may not be able to see it unless you're close up.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Over there.
You don't see that.
I don't know.
You're losing.
We need a farmer.
Yeah.
A shepherd.
Says the Gemara weiter. Kriyashma. Kriyashma that we are allowed to say in any language, minol. And how do you know it's allowed to be said in any language? Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, Shema Yisrael. It says, listen Yisrael, and it should have said Shimu, because we were talking to it should be a plural lashon, as lashon rabim, it should say Shimu, and since it says Shema, therefore it's a singular lashon, so we darshan from there, b'chol lashon shata shemea, in any language that you could understand. Taner Rabbanan. There's really machlokes whether or not Kriya Shema is allowed to be said in any language, or it has to be said specifically in Lashon HaKodesh. Kriya Shema kichsava divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says that Kriya Shema has to be said exactly as it is written in Lashon HaKodesh. B'chol say b'chol lashon, in any language that you want. My time with Rebbe. What is the reasoning of Rebbe that he requires it to be said in Lashon HaKodesh? Omar Kra, the pasuk says v'hayu. The pasuk says v'hayu. It should be b'vyasan yehei. It should be exactly as it was written. That's how it should be. It should be read. The Rabbanan say, Omar Krosh Shema, b'chol lashon shata shemea. In any language that you understand, that's the lashon you're allowed to read it in. So the Rabbanan, Nami Haksivahayu. The Rabbanan also have the pasuk Vahayu. What do they do with it? And that they still allow you to say it in any language. Hahu d'shlo yikrin l'mafreya. That's coming to tell you that you're not allowed to read the Parsha Shema out of order. It has to be exactly in the order of the psukim, even though you're reading in another language, but it has to still follow the same sequence of the Parsha that's written in the Torah. The Rebbe, where does he know that you're not allowed to read it out of order? You have to still stay in the same order, since he uses v'hayu for something else. From the extra hey, he darshans that you have to read it in the same order. They don't seem to be bothered by the extra hey, and they don't darshan anything from there. The Rebbe Nami Yaksiv Shema. What does Rebbe do with the pasuk of Shema? He requires you still to say it only in Lashon Kodesh. That you should hear in your ears what's coming out of your mouth, and you should be able to hear it. It should be audible. Rabbanan Savri, what do the Rabbanan say? Command Amar Hakari as Shema v'lo yishmi la'ozna yatsa. Someone who reads Shema and does not hear what he's saying, he's still yatsa, and that's not a problem. Lema Kosava Rebbe. Let's say the Rebbe holds that every language, that the Kol Torah, when you read the Torah in Shul, you're allowed to say it in every language. We're just going to finish the two dots here because it's really one Gemara. If Rebbe requires you to say in Lashon HaKodesh. If he calls Shema to be saying Lashon HaKodesh, if every person in the Torah would be required to say in Lashon HaKodesh, then you wouldn't need a specific pasuk by Shema requiring you to say in Lashon HaKodesh. Obviously, from the fact that there's a pasuk requiring you to say Shema in Lashon HaKodesh, the rest of the parasha, up until then, would have been allowed to be said in any other language. Says the Gemara, no. Itzrich mishum d'ksiv Shema. Really, I can tell you that the whole parsha also needs to be, every other parsha in the Torah needs to be said in Lashon HaKodesh. But since there's a pasuk of Shema here, we need another pasuk telling you don't darshan Shema to say any language, but specifically say it in Lashon HaKodesh. Says the Gemara, Lema kasavar Rabbanan kol Torah kula b'Lashon HaKodesh. Nemra. Let's say that the Rabbanan, who say that you're allowed to say Shema in every language, say that the Torah is allowed to be said in every other language. These are the Lashon HaKodesh. Remember that Torah has to be said specifically in Lashon HaKodesh. These are the if the Torah is allowed to be said in every other language, Shema the Kasar Rachman Alamali. Why did the pasuk need to specifically allow you to say Shema in every language if the Torah anyways is allowed to be said in Lashon HaKodesh? And it says Mar Itzrich Mishum D'Ksiv V'Hayu. Since it's V'Hayu, you would have thought to say specifically in Lashon HaKodesh. So therefore, we had to have the pasuk of Shema to tell you that it's allowed to be said in any other language.